GOP voters can be saved, politicians not so much. I disagree. Everyone can be saved. But it's not always practical to hold out hope for that. The GOP voters are just people. A lot of GOP voters are fine and decent people. I know GOP voters. I have family who vote GOP. I have had friends who vote GOP. A lot of them are fine people with anything ranging from mild to moderate biases to misunderstandings of how systems work. Often they just really don't trust government, and everything else kind of stems from that. Sometimes they're hardliners in issues like abortion, and that settles it for them. And sometimes they want you dead. But the sad thing about the impressionability of the average voter is that people who don't want you dead today can want you dead tomorrow if they're told the right things. There's a reason why Germany invested so heavily in its propaganda wing, trying to convince its population of the moral necessity of ridding Germany of the Jews. You know, they had to convince the German people. If they didn't need to convince them, they wouldn't have needed the propaganda wing. But they did, and they invested massively into it. The groomer stuff, that's going to be it. At least that's going to be a big part of it. The framing of a minority group as being a part of a degenerate intellectual cabal corrupting your children is a long-standing, very, very prominent and long-standing template to frame minority groups into. It's been done to homosexuals, transgender people. It's been done to Jews. I believe it's been done to Romani people in their own way in Europe many times over the centuries. Though not the intellectual elite in that respect, more of a culturally distanced sort of, it's been done a great many times. And if you get people settled on that, keep in mind, just a few years ago, what was the mainstream Republican talking point about trans people? It wasn't this groomer crap. It was, we feel bad for them because scientifically there are only two sexes and gender is the same as sex, and it's not logical that you can be that, and Ben Shapiro, blah, blah, blah. It wasn't hatred. It was patronization. It was paternalistic, patronizing derision, not hatred. Even people like Steven Crowder, who are incredibly hateful people, were talking about trans people with a degree of sympathy. Oh, they're mentally ill, they've been waylaid. That was just a few years ago. That was what was happening back when I started my channel. I've been doing this for 3 years. And what is the language now? Do you hear that veiled sympathy anymore? No, you don't. The only time you hear that veiled sympathy now is for the armies of 5-year-olds being groomed into being trans by elementary school teachers. The sympathy is gone. And what it's been replaced with is a malicious targeting, a hateful and incisive accusation of child grooming. And folks, what do you think the average Republican parent is going to do if they feel like their gender nonconforming child has been maliciously groomed by an elementary school teacher with blue hair and a septum piercing? People get killed over this, folks. People get shot over this. You know all those stories you sometimes see on Twitter or Reddit or whatever, and it's some story like father cuts off head of baby girl's rapist, not charged in trial, and people go, woo, very violent, but who wouldn't want to cut off the head of the person who raped their child? That's how they're going to feel about you. That's how they're going to feel about those blue hair, septum piercing, sporting teachers. It'll be the exact same mentality. Parents standing up against groomers and sexual degenerates and predators of children, and they will kill them. And the courts will argue whether or not it was justified. The gay panic defense is still on the books in places of America. You really think Republican state courts aren't going to deliberate? That Republican-filled juries aren't going to deliberate? Oh, sure, it was a murder, but it was a justified murder because it was done after the inciting incident. This young child claims to be transgender, a degenerate deviation of natural human behavior which could have only come about through grooming, something their teacher must have done with the blue hair and the septum piercing. Am I wrong? I see the liberals on Twitter and the Twitch politics sphere take issue with what I've said here, but I genuinely don't think anything that I've said here is unreasonable. I actually think it's a fairly straightforward assessment of the situation. Just people want to believe so badly that it's not going to happen, that it can't happen here, that they delude themselves. Will this all come to pass guaranteed? I don't know. Nobody knows. But is it a decent possibility? Yeah, I think so. Not only not impossible, I'd say decently likely. It will happen, at least to some people. Whether it happens on a mass scale is not easy to predict. And if people get tired of the apocalyptic rhetoric, I sincerely apologize, but I consider it a civic responsibility of anyone who discusses these issues to frame them in a light which appropriately describes the degree of severity that is present. I don't feel it's morally right to talk about this in any other framework. I think it's deeply irresponsible to frame this as some partisan bickering that, oh, it happens. Lots of things happen, but I'm sorry if it's disruptive. That's enough of that. Well, I'm going to be honest, this does kind of make me feel doomer, but it awakens something in me. Not a sense of responsibility, but a sense of need to work to make this shit better for all of us. You must understand here, I'm not here to cultivate the opposite sense of stochastic memeing that the Republican Party certainly seems to. What I want is for all of you to be ready. See, terror is something they need to instill in us, but fear is something we need to instill in us. You gain nothing from random acts of violence, and I genuinely, and without a joke or a pepe, don't endorse them. I don't think they're effective. My concerns against them, my problems with them are utilitarian in nature. I don't think they're effective. What I do think is effective is battering down the hatches. Your own fortress arc, if you like. You can learn how to use a firearm and own one if you feel it prudent and not a threat to your own safety. You can store it safely, as I sometimes do and often don't. I keep them unloaded. That's what matters. No kids in the house. You can learn your neighborhood. Get to know your neighbors. See, if things ever really, really, really go down, I mean, like really go down, we've seen examples of this in Nazi Germany. Let's use a different example, the Rwanda genocide. People were butchered in their own homes by neighbors with machetes. If you know your neighbors, you know who you can trust and who you can't. You know which groups you can rely on and which you can't. And your neighborhood becomes stronger as a collective. Let me tell you, a neighborhood block of 100 people who don't talk to each other and don't own firearms, prime real estate for fascist occupation. And by fascist occupation, of course, I don't mean the government. If the army comes in, you're well and fucked anyway. But it's not just the army that comes, does it? The thing that tends to come before the army is the militia groups. That's what happened in the Night of Broken Glass, right? That's what happened with the Rwanda genocide. It's not like tanks roll in, it's neighbors or people from out of town in trucks with guns. And I'll tell you, 100 people in a neighborhood with no guns who don't talk to each other, prime real estate for militia occupation. One little group of people, one group of guys in a truck, 4 of them in the back of a pickup with a rifle each and a bunch of ammunition, they can take over a group of 100, 500. They can take a whole neighborhood. Who's going to stand up against them? But you got a neighborhood where every 5th person owns and knows how to use a gun, and all of them talk to each other. Maybe not every other person, but at least in chains. That neighborhood is a fortress. Militia can't break that. A group of guys, some militia fuck red hat dipshits, wheel in to the neighborhood with their rifles screaming and shooting and shouting, and they get perforated from every open apartment window. Isn't that better? Don't you want to be able to defend your neighborhood? Your neighbors are probably fine people. Not all of you, but a lot of them. And it's good to know and bake some folks some brownies. A strong neighborhood is more important than a strong individual. This is what the preppers don't understand. The people, the doomsday preppers. You are worthless and vulnerable if all you do is you hoard and you stockpile and we'll survive. No. This isn't how it works. People don't survive civil unrest. Communities survive civil unrest. And if the community survives, the people in that community survive. The selfish, the isolatory attitude, isolationist attitude towards civil unrest, it gets people killed. It deprives people of resources. 100 guns in a bunker being guarded by one man are 100 guns which could be distributed to a neighborhood of like-minded individuals. And 100 people with 100 guns is significantly more protective than one person with 100 guns. Massively so. by a huge degree. And this is what I think we should do. The proportion of people in America who genuinely want an end to democracy is a minority, a significant minority. And I think it's important to remember that. In every instance of civil unrest in all of recorded human history, the minority controls the majority by controlling key centers of power and denying the majority the ability to express themselves, to rise up, to rise forward, to seize power again. And they do this very, very effectively in most cases through legitimate institutions. But there is a breaking point when militias come into play. Because if a militia is up and shooting up your neighborhood, legally speaking, you're in the right for dealing with them. Which means that any imposition against you afterwards would have to come through, similarly, an or illegal institution or individual. The militias would have to deal with people who attack militias, or the cops would have to side with the courts to defend the retaliatory violence against you. But there are only so many cops. And the courts tend to side with us. And the juries in blue neighborhoods would side with you. And how would they even arrest you? If the cops are siding with the militia, can you even tell them apart? Would conservative courts not exonerate the militia? I also suggest people move to blue states. Oh, and a hearty reminder to everyone who is listening that what I'm describing right now, very simple, very basic advocacy or civil unrest preparation and defensive action. That is it. What I'm saying right now is as uncontroversial as the statement that it is acceptable to shoot a person who is in the process of attempting to shoot you. It is as clear in a legal and moral sense as any issue imaginable. It is completely and absolutely and impossibly senseless to hear what I've said here and think, oh, this is some radical. This isn't radical. What I'm describing right now isn't just American law. It goes back to British common law. It goes back before we even had a democracy. The basic ideas that I'm expressing here, the basic right to self-defense, to community defense in times of civil unrest, very simple stuff. Very simple. We need to do a stream where I don't go on a 2-hour rant about how the end is nigh. I almost moved into Idaho. Thank Lord I did my research because that state is horrible for queer people like me. Anyway, take shower, stinky. I'm not stinky. Vontex the $5. You need to do more streams where you bring up guns and community defense. I have a feeling it'll keep coming up. People who call your rhetoric doomer don't understand what that means. Doomerism is conceding nothing can be done. Highlighting severity is very necessary. Yeah, like it'd be like calling a person doomer because they're pointing out that climate change is going to fuck us. Theory populist right consists of two groups, fascists and closet socialists who haven't figured it out yet. Unfortunately, I feel like it's more slant to the former group. Have you heard of the Greater Idaho Plan? Seems like it could be a spark for a fascist buildup on an unfederal level. Oh yeah, fascists are always getting really hyped up for border changes to make like a big white area or whatever. It ain't gonna happen. But yeah, there's the Pacifica stuff. It's been around for a while too.